Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to the Christmas edition of That'll Be the Day. In this podcast, we'll hear from a visually impaired woman who's had an extraordinary life. But before we hear from Penny Melville Brown, if you like the music at the start of this podcast, it's a track called That'll Be the Day by the Liverpool band The Vow. And as always, we'll be hearing a track by The Vow at the end of this podcast. To find out which one it is, stay tuned. Penny Melville Brown has known success and disaster throughout her life and has demonstrated a great deal of resilience in responding to the challenges that have confronted her. Before we hear from Penny, however, a huge thank you to Glynis Gillam from Blind Veterans, who put me in touch with Penny. As a former naval officer, Penny uses the charity's excellent services. Anyway, I joined Penny in her home while she was baking a Christmas cake. Do you want me to stir it?
Go on, if you can feel up to it.
Well, I'm not a cook, and I have to be honest, Penny, and say, I can reheat things and I can do curries and chili con carne, but cakes are a little bit beyond my pay grade generally, so...
Can I tell you, you could make...
We've now moved to Penny's atrium, which was a present to herself for a certain birthday. We won't say which one it was. But it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you, Tom. It's lovely.
How important is Christmas to you, Penny?
Oh, really important. You know, I'm preparing cakes. I made mincemeat, weeks ago. My fruit has been in soak for the Christmas puddings and the Christmas cakes for about 3 months. We'll have about 3 Christmas trees here. There'll be Christmas stockings at the end of the bed, a proper Christmas lunch. I've already been wrapping Christmas presents. I think I've bought them all now. Just need to tartle them around and do all the decorative bits, and I'm getting on with it.
There is an art to wrapping presents which I haven't mastered. Have you mastered it as a visually impaired?
Well, shall I tell you the most important bit about that art is actually to use the wrapping paper the right way out. You round the outside and then you cut across.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And that's called folding in.
Right.
And what you're doing is I'm doing it with a silicone spatula.
You've had the most extraordinary life. I mean, anybody who knows anything about you at all will know that, you've courted disaster and success almost in equal measure.
Yeah, yes.
Tell me first of all about your childhood, Penny, because you were fully sighted then, weren't you?
Oh, yes. I was going to say I had a childhood like anyone else, but obviously not everybody else is fit and well throughout all their childhood. But I did school, I went off to university, I was, what I really wanted to do was architecture at one stage and then law, but I gave up and did English literature, which was actually in comparison quite boring. Then I had a year sort of free and gratis because they offered me a teacher training postgraduate course. And I did that and I decided that was definitely not what I wanted to do. But I was supposed to be getting married just about then, but my fiancé was killed in a car crash.
That's awful.
So it was awful. So I decided I'd do something completely different. And you know how in the papers, I don't know whether they still have it in the papers these days, they have lots of adverts for jobs and things. So I applied to anything that might be vaguely interesting. So I did banking, retail, food, advertising, publishing, all sorts of different things. And I found one for the Royal Navy. And I hadn't realised at the time, but it was designed for men. But anyway, I applied. And the long and short of it is that I joined the Royal Navy. In those days, it was the Women's Royal Naval Service, as a direct entry Wren, which meant you did a quick shake and bake course at HMS Dauntless, which was in Nissen huts back then. Then a bit of time at Portsmouth to learn about the Navy, just 3 months. And then I went straight off to Dartmouth to do my training as an officer.
Good Lord.
I was an officer. It was frightfully posh. And we even had practice cocktail parties, so you learned how to talk to people properly at a cocktail.
What did the work involve? And what does an officer do? Well, mainly drinking. Did you have any official tasks apart from drinking?
Well, my first job was in Naples, where I was doing NATO intelligence. And then I went on and did home defence and war planning near Portsmouth. I went up to the Ministry of Defence, and I was in charge of public relations for the Wrens, and then the Quorns, which is the Naval Nursing Service. I ran the University Royal Naval Units, and then I was sitting at lunch one day, and somebody said, "What we really need is a woman barrister." I thought about law a long time ago. So I said, "Oh, I can do that," as one does. And in the Navy, one is, always a blagger. So I said, yes, I could do that. And so the long and short of that was that I ended up, after a year of academic law in London, then a year at bar school, then some time in pupillage, as going back into the Navy, or going back to work in the Navy, as the first woman barrister. Within about a year of me starting that in Portsmouth, my eyesight started to deteriorate. I went down to Plymouth as a staff legal advisor, and by then my right eye was really being very tricky. So I went up to Moorfields, and they put me on these enormous doses of steroids. And the upshot was it was either die because my kidney and liver were dying, or give up my right eye. So that wasn't much of a choice. So I did all of that and staggered back to the Navy after 14 months. And it was a stagger. I could barely walk because of the effect of the drugs. And I took up another job, again in Portsmouth, and then my left eye started to go. So then I had to give up driving, but I was still working in uniform in the Navy. I was promoted to commander, and I was sort of looking after a headquarters for a short time, and then I went on to another job doing naval personnel and strategy. But by that time I was using a white cane in the dockyard in uniform, and the security guards used to fish me out of the bushes because they're not really lit for very visually impaired people. And so I'd get lost and they'd fish me out and send me back on my way.
How did your colleagues react to the fact that you were losing your sight, you were visually impaired using a white cane? Did they accommodate you? Were they just kind of, oh, well, that's just Penny?
All of that. Yes, they were extremely kind, because of course the armed forces are not subject to the employment elements of the Equality Act. So that they had no obligation to keep me as a disabled person.
And what about the Navy? What about the top brass, as I think we should call them?
I think everybody was trying to be accommodating, but when you're in a service or any of the armed forces, and they're used to young, fit, active people, and to have somebody who is clearly not that was just quite strange for them. But they got me screen magnification, which I could use in those days. I had an outstanding warrant officer who helped me. And he wasn't a support worker. We were working together, but he, just did that extra bit to make life easier for me. But for me, though, they were clearly finding it difficult, and I wasn't going to get the promotion jobs I wanted, and they were finding it more and more difficult. So in the end, I was medically discharged as a war pensioner. From a psychological point of view, how did you feel? I mean, was it something you were just able to deal with, or were you sort of quietly traumatised while trying to be competent? I think the most important thing for my whole life was how the Royal Navy supported me and allowed me to work when I was very visually impaired, and allowed me to prove primarily to myself that I could still do not only a job, but a bloody good job, and be really successful at it. And that gave me the confidence to think I can do anything. And when I was medically discharged, I was worried about being able to pay my mortgage, because I wasn't really very au fait with what benefits I might get. And I was worried that I would lose my home, and that was really important to me. So I decided I'd try and find a job, and getting a job seemed to be impossible. I talked to some of the ex-service charities, and they had no idea. They had no concept of how to help me. And so in the end, I decided I was going to dedicate the rest of my working life to helping other disabled people get back to work. Because, of course, most people with a disability acquire that during their working lives. And we're talking 70% of disabled people during their working lives. So I decided I would become a disability consultant.
Hence Disability Dynamics, I think it's called, isn't it?
Exactly.
Before we talk about that, can I just ask you, you mentioned there about the high rate of unemployment among visually impaired and people with other disabilities.
Yes.
You've been a fully sighted, fully able-bodied person working in the Navy. Can you understand why employers might be a little bit nervous over the idea of employing a disabled person or a visually impaired person?
I can understand it entirely, because I've worked in that field for over 20 years, and it's fear and ignorance. And the fear is mainly of embarrassing themselves, of looking stupid, looking foolish. They don't know how to talk to disabled people. They don't know how to approach them physically. They just don't know what to do. And it's so much easier just to walk away.
Are things improving now? I mean, what, in 2022, 27-ish years, I think, after the first DDA? Are things getting better?
No.
I feel myself as if things are actually getting slightly worse, because employers have almost learnt how to fireproof themselves against legal action. What would your thoughts be on that?
I think attitudes towards disability come from the very top. And that's at policy level, government level, also at the top of these big organisations. They, as I was saying to you about in the Navy, people had very little exposure to disabled people. And so this ignorance kicks in, and they see us as risky financially and all the rest of it. Now, this is always the interesting bit when you can't see, is getting all this sloppy mixture into the container.
Yeah.
So,
when did you set up Disability Dynamics? How long has it been going for?
It started it opened in 2000, and I closed it in 2021, I think.
And tell me a bit more about the work you did then, because you've talked about policy advice.
Yeah.
Did you work with individual disabled people, or were you working at a slightly more macro level?
In the early days, I was doing much more strategic stuff with government departments and the public and the private sector. But I was also doing a whole range of public appointments. So I was on the board of HMRC, of the Employment Tribunal System. I was chair of the Learning and Skills Council for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, all sorts of stuff. A War Pensions Committee, I chaired that. So one was endeavouring to exert influence at that policy level and try and change how they actually wrote their employment policies, as simple as that. What
was the reaction towards you from people in places like HMRC and the Employment Tribunal? Were you treated as an equal, or did you feel that in some way you might have been patronised? How did they react to you?
Not many people patronise me.
No, I've gathered that, yes. Yeah.
No, I'm a thoroughly competent, capable person, and I can express myself, I hope, clearly, and I have sound judgment, and I am well researched and very knowledgeable. I think I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago, and my three principles are competence, confidence and care when you're looking at your profession.
The 3 C's.
Yeah, and if you cannot be competent in your job, go and learn, go and study, go and get experience, because nobody's going to succeed if they're not competent.
How did Disability Dynamics evolve over the 20-odd years of its life?
Well, I was invited to become chairman of a little not-for-profit organisation called Business Ability, and they were promoting self-employment for disabled people. And actually, I'd also been doing some speaking for the European Blind Union. I was actually in Cyprus, and I'd done some other World Blind Union events. And not just speaking, but actually listening to other people. And what became very clear to me was that blind people were working all over the world, but they were primarily self-employed. So I took that and went off to Business Ability, and I liked what they were doing, but they were not really making big impact because they were so tiny. And I was talking to Margaret Hodge, as one drops,
MP, a former MP.
Yeah, but
she still is an MP, maybe. Yeah,
she was then the minister. I think she may be. Isn't she in the House of Lords now?
She may well be. Yes.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, she was then the Minister for Employment, and she said, "What you really need to do is pilot this and demonstrate that it works." And because this little not-for-profit really didn't have the financial background to do it, Disability Dynamics did. I created the model for the Work for Yourself programme, and I ran it in Derbyshire across the county, and then a couple of the councils up there wanted me to go back and run longer term projects, and in the end I was running Work for Yourself in Derbyshire, mainly in Chesterfield and Bolsover district, and we were hugely successful. We had a 40% success rate, so anybody who was eligible who rang us up said, "I want to have a go at this." Of those 40%, either started a business, got a job, or went into vocational training. And that is comparable with the very, anything that DWP. But then I had a big ding-dong with DWP and Access to Work, because they arbitrarily decided that I didn't need as much support as I had in the past for the last 15 years. Can you imagine it?
Well, I've had issues. I'll talk to you about that in a moment with Access to Work.
But anyway, so they, in those days, when I declined to accept their decision, I got no support worker. So I was unable to work, except I was then funding my support worker from my business. And the business, we'd always kept my sort of income from the business fairly modest. So this was not going to be viable, and they did not understand that if you're going to take on a contract, you need to be sure you've got viability for 3 years or whatever, the duration of that contract. And so I decided that I would start a new venture, and this was Baking Blind. And the whole thing about Baking Blind was not to help other visually impaired people or disabled people to cook. My goodness, they can either do it or they can't, or they can learn. It was absolutely about trying to demonstrate that disabled people of any ilk can do nearly anything. And I was just kicking off doing a few Christmas cakes, funnily enough. And then I got this email that's saying, "Would you like to win $25,000?
And who would say no?
Well, not me. And it came from this organisation in San Francisco who'd picked up some of my YouTube videos and my, rather sketchy attempts to promote what I was doing. And the long and the short of it was that I won the prize.
Before I forget, because my little brain doesn't hold things for very long, I wanted to ask you about Access to Work, and we'll come back to Baking Blind in a moment. A lot of certainly visually impaired people, and disabled people actually, of my acquaintance, complain bitterly about Access to Work. What are your thoughts? How could it be improved?
The process is pretty dreadful. The people who make decisions have very little knowledge of disability. They have absolutely no knowledge of the business world. So if you're an entrepreneur, as I am, they have no cognizance of that whatsoever. And somebody who's writing policies, strategies, does not understand the totality of the employment world. For my case, it was almost impossible to find out how to elevate my complaint. I eventually discovered the independent case examiner and took my complaint to them. I eventually took my complaint from them to the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, and my complaint actually took 7 years.
What was the outcome? Going back to outcomes.
Pitiful. It took really no recognition of the fact that I'd been forced to close my business. So this is just going to go into the oven. I've put it on a tray because it's a silicone pan.
Let's go back to Baking Blind. Let's go back now to Baking Blind. I don't normally do this. Normally my podcasts, we're much more organised, in how we do them. But this is great. I love this. This is kind of the Christmas randomness that I like. So Baking Blind, then you won your prize. And
this is the Christmas ramble, I think.
Yeah, this is not a podcast anymore. No, we've turned this into a Christmas ramble. You won your prize. What happened after that?
I went off to San Francisco, so I flew over to San Francisco. And during all the time, this took about 6 months to get to that stage, I was making more videos, and I used my nephew Toby, who is a really very excellent illustrator and videographer, and just happened to be available. And he gave up 2 months of his time, his earning time, to come with me around the world. And so he and I met up in San Francisco, and we started going to professional chefs, home cooks, anyone who'd responded, because I'd sent emails to everybody I know all over the world saying, would you help me do this Baking Blind thing? And so that's why it was a completely random selection of people.
How would you compare the reaction to you as a visually impaired person around the world in the different countries you went to?
I think with the sighted chefs, and that these might be home cooks or professionals, most of them are terrified of having a blind person in their kitchen. And understandably, because they've got all these these sort of fantasies. But once I was there doing things, chatting with them.
Did they give you like a guided tour of the kitchen, say, right, okay, this is here, this is there, or did you just do that yourself?
We just got on with it, really.
Right. No faffing about.
No.
And are you continuing to make videos under the auspices of Baking Blind now?
I haven't for a while because of COVID, actually. But also we came back, and I was in France for a while, and I'll tell you about that in a minute.
Yes, I was going to ask you about France.
But I'm also doing, I've been doing, throughout COVID, I've been doing monthly online cooking demos for other visually impaired people. I've written the book, you can have the t-shirt. So I'm keeping myself active on that.
How's the book gone? I mean, has it flown off the shelves? How's it?
It was just self-published.
Oh, right, brilliant.
I suspect it's not rushing off the shelves yet, but your listeners are very welcome
to buy it. Yeah,
welcome to buy it.
Is it on Amazon or somewhere?
It's on Amazon.
I thought it might be.
And it's on Kindle.
Oh, even better.
The joy of the Kindle one, where they've both got links to all the videos.
So if you haven't got the book, get it on Kindle, click on the links, and you can watch Penny doing all her cooking. Now, I want to ask you about France as well, because you were over in France, and I think, if I remember correctly from the things I've read, you had quite an interesting, if not difficult, time over there.
I'm told I'd been there for a week, but basically I was in a car accident after a week. And I was in a coma for 6 weeks.
Good Lord.
In intensive care for 2 months, and then in a rehabilitation hospital in France for another 3 months. I broke my C2 vertebra.
Good Lord.
And that's one right at the top of your neck, which is one of the really important ones for whether you live or die. And they couldn't do a surgical intervention, because I had so many I'd broken all the ribs on one side and my sternum, and I had internal injuries. They couldn't turn me over to do the surgery, so therefore they just had to put me into a sort of fiberglass. I don't think they are fiber, but
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, hard plastic neck brace, and that's what I wore for months. And so the only way they could manage me, because I was intubated as well. And so I had all these pipes going up my nose for oxygen.
God. I'm feeling a bit queasy.
Well, I had awful nightmares about it, because I was obviously aware that I had all these tubes going into me.
Let's lighten the mood a little bit now. Christmas then. You've given us some idea as to what you're likely to do. I mean, has Christmas always been important to you?
Yes. I come from a big family, so I have 4 brothers, and so Christmas has always been fun. And wherever I've been in the world, I've celebrated Christmas and made it special.
So from a visual perspective,
Yes.
what will the Christmas dinner look like? Will it be quite decorative, or, do you think?
I hope it's hot and it actually lands exactly on the plate.
Will there be a glass of vino with it? Any wine or anything like that?
Yes, I think there might be a bottle of sparkling wine somewhere. Do you hear that?
That is Alexa telling you that the Christmas cake is nearly ready.
Yes, it's smelling a bit hot actually.
It's smelling very, very good indeed.
If it's a bit brown, we'll just dismiss that bit, okay? And I'm just going to come over here and I've got my magic talking thermometer. So I'm going to put it into the middle, not push it all the way down, give it a ping.
27.1 degrees.
That's a bit depressing, 27.
27.
What you want with a cake or bread is at least 90 degree.
8.7.
So I think this is just a bit underdone.
Needs a bit longer.
Needs a bit longer in the oven.
So there you go, we'll leave Penny in her kitchen there with the cake, but I can assure you it turned out fine. But for those of you who are concerned about my waistline, you needn't worry, I didn't get any of it at all. Now, if you want to find out more about Penny, her recipes or book, you can do so online at pennymelvillebrown.com. That's pennymelvillebrown.com. Okay, so which vow track have I chosen? Well, it had to be this one at Christmas, didn't it? Peace in our time.
Today, the cool winds of dawn phased me out. I couldn't beat the countdown. At last, without grace, I've learned how to lose. I'm on the tack that brings me back to you. I don't know, but I'm told that the truth is stranger than fiction. An ominous, anonymous message we'll miss. Can a Jesus freak speak with no obvious conviction? I'll take it from you, I'm part of this. Did you ever dream of peace in our time? You couldn't keep your people in line. Maybe we should try and spend a little more time together, together, together. Somewhere, someone crash dived their life, making peace like there was no tomorrow. I know, 'cause I saw the last days of Earth as it creaked inside, sank and died alone. There's a letter in the sand and it's signed, sealed and scented. An asinine line someone forgot to send to the only true blue that the human race invented. Is all of our hearts, world without end. Did you ever dream of peace in our time? You couldn't keep your people in line. Maybe we should try and spend a little more time together, together, together. Did you ever dream of peace in our time? You couldn't keep your people together.